We're going to go ahead and get started with our very packed day today. As you can see, we've got quite a schedule. Their schedules are in back, correct? Is that right? They're in the back. But we really want to welcome everyone here. We're really looking forward to this day. This is a very broad topic, and we're hoping to cover a lot of subjects. Last year, in 2014, 41% of our instructional materials were digital. In 2015, 87% of the instructional materials ordered were digital. With digital content more than doubling in 1 year, this conversation today is very timely. It's a big topic, and it's one that our state leadership is having in the office of the governor, lieutenant governor, speaker, and legislature. The impact of technology in the classroom has huge implications both for the promise and for the pitfalls. And our goal today is to discuss both in the hope that we can begin to coalesce around some smart expectations that we want to set in order to best educate, support, engage, and protect our children as we enter into this brave new world. Topics today are going to cover cost, effectiveness of content, customizing education for every student, some of the challenges we're going to talk about today, how to protect our children, family privacy issues, who has access and to what, the alignment of our content that's in the classroom with Texas standards and when it can change on a dime with a mouse click. Recent reports have highlighted technology, the issues with distraction in the technology taking away from deep learning. So we want to talk about that today. We're going to talk about the digital divide, who's got access to technology and who does not. We want all of our children to learn in the most effective way for them, and we need to prepare our children for this increasingly complex world and digital world. As we discuss these issues today, we hope we'll get some answers and some signs pointing the way forward. For logistics, the speakers are to sign in with Terry. Miss Terry is sitting over there. Raise your hand. And make sure that if you have any handouts, you give them to Terry so she's ready to hand those out when each panel comes to speak. Collect your tent card with your name on it and place it in front of you when you speak, and that way we'll be able to know who's talking to us. There's a bell. Do we have the bell? That will ring once when you have 1 minute remaining in your time to speak. It will ring twice when you're out of time and you got to finish your sentence because we need to move to the next presenter. So I will not introduce the presenters. You introduce yourself. You know what order you're in. You know what your time is, and you'll just keep on speaking. As each panel takes their seat up front, the next group of panelists needs to move to the reserved seats up front to be ready to hop up as soon as the other panel finishes so that there isn't any time delay with getting to your seat. Members, this is going to be a fast-moving day, and gotten text from folks that are a little late because of the traffic and the storm this morning, but we're looking forward to engaging all day. The times we need to track are listed on your agenda. Does everybody have your agenda packet so you can kind of flip through there and know what the times are for the speakers? I want to make sure you've got that packet. It's a stapled packet. So flip through that.
It's different than yours.
Oh no, mine's different because I've got some other information on here. So so you've got you can see the agenda of speakers and the times for Q&A. Has everybody got that? I want to make sure we're tracking with the time.
Everybody got it? Yeah.
Okay. So you have an agenda of speakers. You also will have a glossary. Renee, are we getting that glossary?
Yes,
okay. There's a glossary of terms because there are going to be a lot of terms thrown around today that are, some of you may or may not be familiar with it. That way we don't have to ask the speakers to define terms. So a lot of acronyms and that sort of thing. So we wanted to make sure that you had all of that today. We also have bios on all of the speakers that you can flip through and see who is speaking to you. They're going to be making these presentations. And we have a full list of questions as well that we developed, and we emailed back and forth. We've got those questions there. If you want to use any of those questions or come up with your own questions as you go through the day, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of things that come to mind. And so please hold your questions to the end of each panel for the Q&A time. And then we will have to, as soon as that time is over, we're going to stop and move on to the next panel. Unlike what we usually do, which is, we continue to ask questions. We won't be able to do that today because we have so many topics to cover. So we'll just keep moving. If hopefully members we'll doing our best to track who's asking questions, so not one member gets a lot more questions than all the other members. So we're trying to do our best to track that. So it's going to be a fast-moving day, so we appreciate your help with that. Any remaining questions that you have should be asked of the panelists after they move offline, so feel free to get up. Everyone should know that there's a room behind us that you access through this door. For members, you can go back. There's a little break room. There's also a bathroom back there as well, because we're not used to meeting in here. So just want to make sure that our speakers know that. So you can go back there if you need to make phone calls or take a drink of water or whatever. Again, I want to thank the presenters for speaking with us today, and we have a broad cross-section of experts from infrastructure to content providers to educational content consumers, and we appreciate your volunteering to come and from many parts of the United States. We look forward to all you have to share with us. So our first panelist is going to be up, and that's Dr. Chuck Weaver from Baylor University. And Dr. Weaver, you've got 30 minutes with all the Q&A.
Great.
Including the Q&A.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. This will be, looking at the rest of the agenda, this is one of these things is not like the others talk. But as you guys start discussing technology, what we might do, how things might be presented digitally, one of the more important things we've learned in the past 15 years is that it really doesn't matter what the technology is if the thing being implemented isn't worth doing. And what I do as a college professor is teach the products, by and large, of the educational system. And what I'll talk about today is really more from a student perspective. What kinds of things have we learned that have been effective? What kinds of things should we encourage people to do? What kinds of things should we have technology implement for us? Just 15 seconds, 30 seconds of historical background. My field got interested in the question of student learning as a byproduct of, and I'll duck after I say this, have a feeling that there'll be some tomatoes thrown, No Child Left Behind. One of the positives of that was the money that was put into research. And as the traditional funding sources in my field, psychology and neuroscience, began to dry up, applied questions in education remained available. And so we've really seen in the past 15 or 20 years a merging of classic educational theory and contemporary research on whether or not the things that we've always taught are effective. We've kind of accepted it on faith that things like classical educations are effective and worth doing without ever really saying, what do the data say? Today I'll be talking about what the data say. One of the more important things that we have adopted throughout the years is the belief that the amount of time that students spend preparing should be directly correlated to the performance on exams, the amount of learning, and so forth. Remarkably, there's very little evidence to link the two. Now, it's all of the things being equal, it is true that students who study more will do better, but like almost every situation that includes the phrase, all other things being equal, all other things are almost never equal. What we've learned is that a lot of study techniques that students adopt, a lot of things that we do in the classroom, take a lot of time but don't produce a lot of benefit. One of the things that Bob Bjork at UCLA and his colleagues have promoted in the past few years is the notion of what we call desirable difficulties. One of the downsides of technology in recent years has been we're able to make things easier for students. We're able to present textbooks with words already highlighted for them. We're able to present study guides that students can work through that are already prepared for them. In fact, when my kids were in high school, they never bothered to study until they got the study guide, because the study guide was basically the test. And we've learned that those things are counterproductive. Bjork has coined a wonderful phrase called desirable difficulties, and that's the notion that things that we can introduce strategically at the time that students study that make things harder, that cause students to spend more time initially, actually produce much better learning in the long term. Three things that I'll talk about today. One of them is just the general principle that we've gotten away from, I think, is to encourage student-generated learning. Study guides, from an educator's standpoint, are a really valuable thing so long as students themselves produce them. The extent to which we produce material to students and say, here's what you need to know, here's what's really important, we're robbing them the benefit of going through the material on their own and saying, this is important, this isn't. Second thing that I'll talk about is what we call spaced practice, trying to get students to study in a distributed manner rather than cramming for exams. My guess is that students have crammed for exams since the introduction of the first exam. But the data show that the manner in which students prepare for exams is exactly backwards. Rather than spending, if you have an hour to prepare for a test, rather than spending that hour 55 minutes immediately before the test, what you should do is spend the 55 minutes a week before the test and only spend a minute or so reviewing throughout the week. We do it exactly backwards. It's not that massed practice, that cramming is ineffective. It's remarkably ineffective. And there are things that we can do as educators to get away from that. And then finally, and this is another word that I'll say and then duck, testing, we have begun to reevaluate the effectiveness of. We're used to considering testing as a form of assessment. If you say testing, if you guys say testing, you're going to get hate mail. I would encourage us to look differently at testing. To give away my punchline, the single most effective use of study time is time spent testing. Testing, I'll show you some data in just a minute that show you just how robust the effects are. But if we can move away from the notion of testing as a form of assessment and realize that testing itself can be a really valuable educational experience, we can utilize it more appropriately. Now, we're talking really about testing with a lowercase t and not testing with a capital T. But if you hear nothing else I say, again, I'm going to say it twice, the notion that we sometimes give students a pass on a comprehensive final exams because they've been coming to class all the time is probably the most misguided policy that the state follows. There are no circumstances under which students should not take comprehensive exams, ever. All right, I've said it. And I'm going to say it again. This is actually relatively new data, but it's a very old phenomena. What you see in the open circles there is what happens if you equate the amount of study time, but you cram all at once. The dark circles are what happens if you space that study time out. I'm not going to belabor this point because it's really very well understood at this point. But you first off can see why students cram, because at a 5-minute retention interval, the white circle is in fact higher than the black circle. Students are interested in high grades. We as educators are interested in student learning. We should be concerned not so much with how students perform an hour after they study, but how much they remember 6 months after they study. And what you'll see in the black lines there is that studying that is spaced out over a wide period of time shows significantly less forgetting, remarkably less forgetting. And the more spaced that studying is, the less forgetting that you see. I mentioned earlier the shift about 15 years ago from our belief that testing was only a way of assessing learning into a realization that testing is itself a part of learning. This comes from work from Roddy Roediger and his colleagues at Washington University, a really remarkable decade or so of work. We're used to having studying being the focus of learning, and testing we simply find out how effective was the study. What Roediger and his colleagues have found out is If you take a student and have them repeatedly study material, again, you see at very short retention intervals benefits. But you also see really rapid forgetting. In fact, look at how little retention is left after a week if students participate in crammed studying. If you take some of the time they would have spent studying and now test them during that, what you see is lower levels of initial learning, which students will be more concerned about, but much higher levels of learning a week later, which we as educators are more concerned about. Those effects are really robust, even if the time that you take in testing removes time that would have been studying. So if you have 5 hours to prepare for an exam, you're better off studying for 3 hours and testing yourself for 2 than if you spent the entire 5 hours studying. So this is not to say that studying, that testing comes at the expense of learning. It's actually the reverse of that. Testing done the right way promotes learning more effectively than studying itself does. And that's going to have some implications for what we might want to do in the classroom. It's true even if the test is covert. So one of the uses of technology that's often used now, at least in large lecture classes in colleges, is clickers, where you put up a question on the board, kind of like a Who Wants to Be a Millionaire kind of thing. You put the question up and everybody comes up with their answer. That, if you make the students choose an answer prior to showing them the correct answer, you still get the testing effects. You don't actually have to give them the test. You simply have to ask them the questions and then not give them the answer. So that's actually pretty easily incorporated in class. As a classroom teacher, that's one of my biggest weaknesses, is I don't have the patience to sit through the silence when students won't offer an answer. And it really comes at the expense of my effectiveness. It's one of the weaknesses I've simply learned to accept of myself. It's like the fact I'm not quite 6 feet tall. It's just not going to change. This is one of the more remarkable bits of data that Catherine Rawson and her colleagues have. If you take the testing effect that we talked about earlier and look at what happens over, and I'm not sure if there it is, over longer retention intervals, if you space that testing out like we've just described, you can see how relatively little forgetting there is. The magnitude of the differences initially are relatively small. The magnitude of the differences after longer delays, enormous. So the real benefits from testing won't show up on the exam performance itself. The real benefits from testing will show up on the final exam performance. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. I'm going to skip that just in the interest of time. Well, no, I won't. These are some data looking at unsupervised but principled tutorials. The shift in the materials that are available, I'll be honest, I don't know. I haven't reviewed what's available at the elementary and the high school levels, but at the college levels, the online learning programs that exist now from the major publishers are really quite good. That was not the case 15 years ago. 15 years ago, they were a rehash of what was already in the textbook. These days, if you put principled kinds of things in, so if, for example, the centerpiece of an online bit of education involves lots of practice tests, what you see is what you get here. Even if you don't monitor the performance, even if you don't penalize the students for not taking the practice tests, so that's what you see in the unsupervised condition. The effects aren't quite as good because students say they do the tasks when they really don't. But enough of them do that you still see performance gains that are largely similar. It's a real benefit for online kinds of tutorials. Now the trick is to get students to use them. And we would have to incentivize that. We'd have to make sure that they're using the right ones. But what we do in university settings is simply include them as participation grades. We don't include the performance on the exams because that doesn't really matter. What matters is that they take the exams, and we simply incentivize it almost as a pass-fail part of classroom performance. I want to talk very quickly about 4 things we don't need to worry about. You may have seen in various materials the notion of brain-based education, and people often ask me, am I a proponent of brain-based education? I'm a proponent of brain-based education in the same way I'm a proponent of lung-based respiration. It's the only kind of education that takes place. It's a buzz phrase. It's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. So don't worry about that. You might also have seen the really widely advertised brain training programs, things like Lumosity. Some of you may have done them. They probably don't hurt anything, but they don't produce any gains that generalize to other tasks. What happens if you do the Lumosity things is that you get better on the tasks that they practice you on, but you don't get better on any tasks that are related to it. It's like learning to play chess. You get better at playing chess, but that doesn't improve your overall problem-solving skills. There has been, I don't know how many millions of dollars spent in the past decade or so from the Department of Education on programs designed to improve children's working memory, because if we could do that, it would be the most important educational advance of my lifetime. And none of them have proven successful. It's probably still worth funding simply because the potential, if it works, maybe we're just doing it wrong. I'm fairly well convinced at this point that that is not something that's malleable in the same way. It's much like height. They're not things that we can do to improve a student's height. Working memory seems to be something that comes to us relatively fixed. We can help students learn how to allocate it more effectively, but we can't increase the capacity of itself. So don't worry about those kinds of things. Third thing that, and I say this giving you a study skills talk, we shouldn't consider study skills a cure-all. It's not the most important thing. The content mastery is, and I'll talk about that in depth in just a bit. And then finally, I want to encourage you not to pay too much attention to the attention that we're now giving to learning styles. There is very little to no evidence that learning styles is a real thing. It's preferences, and some students like learning from certain kinds of teachers in the same way that I like my car to be blue, but I'm not incapable of driving a car that's red. It's just a preference. It doesn't meaningfully impact education in any way that we've been able to measure. The study skills myth I want to spend a little bit more time with. The mastery-related difficulties that we see don't seem to be related directly to what students are doing as much as lack of knowledge on their part. When new parents ask me, and I get asked this kind of stuff all the time, which games should I buy my children? What preschool should I send them to? There's really only one thing we can do that will have absolute uniform benefits across the board to everybody, and that's to increase the amount of time students spend reading. Some of the numbers there are really striking. When you control for everything there is to control for, the one environmental predictor, the best predictor of classroom performance in children is parents' IQ. I'm not really happy about that either, but that's just a fact. Environmentally speaking, the one thing that we can do that has impact across the board is have children spend time reading. The question is still up in the air as to, I'm going to give you an educated guess, but if you find me in 10 years and tell me I'm wrong, I won't really apologize because it's a guess. My guess is that the delivery of the material, the mechanism by which we deliver it, whether it's on an iPad, whether it's on a Kindle, whether it's on a print book, won't matter as much as we think it does. What will matter is getting students to be faithful to actually spending the time reading. The reading engine that you run is going to work the same whether you're looking at a page or an iPad. I do think there are some benefits of actual books, but I'm kind of a curmudgeon when it comes to that. I'm one of those people that when I review a paper, I print it out on hard copy. I just treat books differently than I do material on a screen, but I'm not sure my kids do. I don't think there doesn't seem to be anything inherent in our neural wiring that would prevent us from reading from a Kindle the way we read from a book. Got to remember that reading is just a technology. It's a way of delivering content. Most stunning number you'll likely hear today, if we compare readers at the 90th percentile with readers in the 10th percentile, would not surprise you that readers in the 90th percentile read more. These are fifth grade readers, so 10 or 11-year-olds. Anybody want to guess how much more? Twice as much? 3 times as much? 200 times more. And that gets at the question of remediation. It is not a difference easily remedied. And it's, in fact, it may not be fixable at the high school level. My belief is that these things, the difference between the children starting schools in higher performing neighborhoods, high SES kinds of neighborhoods, they may come to kindergarten having had their parents read to them for 500 hours or more. Other children come to kindergarten having never opened a book before. And the differences that we see in print exposure there actually project throughout the life. I'll skip that because I know I'm running out of time. It's a recent study. It's actually a British study, but it's going to apply here. If you take, I don't know what the British equivalent of the Iowa test of basic skills is. It's got to be something like the Birmingham test of basic skills or whatever. But standardized tests given to all 7-year-olds in England. And these are individuals who are tracked in their mid-40s. You can make reliable predictions about achievement in 45-year-old adults, controlling for everything we know how to control for, if you know something about their math skills and their reading skills at the time they're 7. What happens is an accumulation of advantage. It's what we call the Matthew effect. Small advantages, the cognitively rich get richer, if you will. Small differences in the first grade become slightly bigger in the second grade, become even bigger in the 5th grade, become probably irreversibly bigger by the time kids are in college. So the time to attack these kinds of things is really, really early. The problem is it's a very resource-intensive fix. Learning styles, let me just give you the quote, because that's something that some of the Ivy Leagues test their incoming college students to find out what learning styles there. There's just no evidence that it has any meaningful impact. This is a review that Hal Pashler and his colleagues did, a meta-analysis of about 100 different studies published over the last 20 years, and you can just see the underlined part. There's no evidence for the learning styles having an impact on education to the extent that we expected it to. Now, almost everything that looks like a learning style is actually a main effect. Some teachers are better than other teachers. That's not a learning styles thing. That's a teaching ability thing. Some students are not equipped to learn in some teachers' classrooms. That's not a learning styles thing. That's a lack of preparation in the students thing. So remediation is not the same thing as a learning style. Putting a child in a class where the class is too advanced for them isn't a problem with learning style. It's a problem that the child hasn't yet mastered material to allow them to be successful. So be a little bit skeptical of anybody that says we're going to test a student's learning style and match an instructional technique to their learning style. Here, I'll get in trouble for saying this, but most students who say, I'm an auditory learner or I'm a doer learner, that's code language for I don't like to read. That's like me saying I'm a walking exerciser. It's actually true because I don't like to run. Running's painful. It's miserable. I can do it. I just don't like it. That's really more akin to what a learning style is. So we just need to be skeptical of the way sometimes that's portrayed. Probably the most important article that has come out in my field in the last 20 years is one that a husband and wife team, John Dunlosky and Catherine Rawson, published, taking a look at the dozen or so most popular study techniques to actually ask the question which actually work. A meta-analysis done for hundreds of studies that they identified, took them years to do. And here are the 10 things, the 10 techniques that they studied. Some of them might not be familiar to you, but most of them would be. The most commonly used techniques would be things like highlighting or underlining, rereading, summarization, self-explanation. Almost all of these are recommended to students at some point or another. Which of these actually work? When we do the research, review the research that's been done, the 5 that unfortunately are those most commonly used, because they're the easiest, there is almost no evidence that they're effective at all. Highlighting and underlining are among the least effective things that students can do when they're studying. Why do students do them? Because they're really easy to do. It's like the diet that you go on that's full of nothing but cookies and Pop-Tarts. It's a really easy diet to follow. As a consequence, it doesn't have any benefit. highlighting and underlining in some cases actually seem to impair learning because students believe once they've highlighted something, they've understood it, when really highlighting simply means, I think that's important, I need to know it. If you give students materials that have already been highlighted for them, they walk away with a false sense of security. They understudy for a test, you ask them to predict their performance and then actually give them the test, they're wildly overconfident. So those kinds of techniques are actually counterproductive. The next three work in some situations, but the evidence in all situations is still relatively mixed. So the old SQ3R, which was the study technique of my childhood, basically. These days we would call that an elaborative interrogation or self-explanation. Works, but doesn't work everywhere, and it doesn't work with all kinds of content material. The only two things that work everywhere, all the time, no matter what, no questions asked, everywhere, are repeated testing, frequent testing of students, and doing things that increase the intervals between studying. So to get them away from a technique of cramming. If you ever are in a situation where somebody says, I don't know how to study, what study technique should I use? This is the best book and there's not a close second. Just came out within the last 2 years or so. It's called Make It Stick. Roddy Roediger and Mark McDaniel at WashU are two of the authors. It's a great gift to give a student as they're going to college. Because the kinds of things that they were able to get by with in high school probably won't work as they go to a university. Let me very quickly summarize some of the techniques that they recommend and the things that I now recommend. If any of you are interested, I've actually got a thing that I give out to students when they ask. I don't give it out until they ask. They need to learn that what they think will work won't before I tell them here's what will work, because what I'm going to tell them is not easy to do. The single biggest change that I've recommended in the last 5 years is that I no longer recommend that students take notes when they read. I now recommend that students read a passage, stop, and then ask themselves, what questions could I ask myself that would find out if I understood what I just read? And then rather than writing a note, to write a question. And then when they study, rather than going back and rereading, they study by reading and answering the questions. So the second thing is related to that. When they answer the questions, one of the things that we have learned is that if we present the question and the answer at the same time, there's no benefit whatsoever. In fact, again, it's counterproductive. Students are all too eager to engage in what we call an illusion of knowing. We've all done this, right? Question one, yeah, I would have gotten that one. Question two, yeah, I would have figured that one out. No, you wouldn't have. It's really important in these situations that when we present questions to students, we force them to answer, even if they have to guess. The cognitive properties that they go through, the operations that they go through in an attempt to answer the question, that's where the action is. So we've got to force them to answer, even if the answer they come up with is wrong. Students have a tendency to cluster. I'll take all of my English, do all my English studying on Monday, I'll do my math studying on Tuesday, I'll do my social studies on Wednesday. We should do all we can to discourage them from doing that, to study a little bit from every subject every day. Borrowing study guides, borrowing lecture notes from people, getting things. My least favorite question from students after they miss a class is, I'm sorry I was gone on Tuesday, did I miss anything? Well, of course you missed. It's okay, I got notes from a classmate. What they don't understand is that there's almost no benefit in having notes from somebody. The benefits are in taking the notes, and they've lost the ability to do that. One of the things that we'll often do to accommodate students that have learning disabilities is having note taker for them. It's one of those things that we sometimes do with the best of intentions that's probably counterproductive. What we ought to do is find a way to encourage, to teach them to take their own notes. Because having the notes doesn't matter. It's taking the notes that matters. We do a lot of things, by the way, in the guise of accommodation that are probably counterproductive. You'd be amazed at the amount of things students spend their time on in the illusion that they're studying. I've had students actually retype the entire text using a different color ink for every paragraph because they say it helps them focus. It doesn't. It's a waste of time. Cramming for tests. Flashcards is kind of complicated. I'm running out of time and I don't want to run against that. If we have time and you're interested, they can be effective if you do them right. That's one of the things that that technology can implement beautifully, because the algorithms of how to use flashcards appropriately are actually pretty easy to build into online study guides. And then finally, I know students hate taking quizzes. My experience as an educator, and this may be true of college students, maybe high school and younger students wouldn't yet appreciate this. In classes where I have quizzes daily, and I now do that, I don't like giving them either, and they tell me how much they hate having weekly quizzes, and they tell me how much they loved that I did it. Because when it comes to preparing for exams, having those quizzes on a regular basis is unbelievably effective. I alluded to this earlier. A comprehensive final exam is a way to combine the best practices in everything. It forces students to go back in a distributed manner and study material that they might not have learned. It spaces the studying out. It gives them another opportunity to benefit from the cognitive operations of taking a test. We really should do all we can to encourage our school systems. And I know why they do. There are funding mechanisms that are tied to attendance. What better way to encourage attendance than to say to students, the thing that you hate the most, we will give you relief from if only you'll come to class. We might want to find a better way to do that. Did I really just finish within 1 minute of my time? So write this date and time down. I've never spoken in a public forum where I didn't run late, and I'm actually done. So thank you. We do have time for questions. I know Donna said that you may have questions about, for example, spelling, handwriting.
Just do 2 questions because we're running into
Yeah.
so, yes, you got to push your button to turn it on to speak.
Good morning, Dr. Weaver. I'm Ken Mercer. And
What district?
as you were talking, I got my reminder that I have my tuition bill due from Baylor this coming semester already.
Yeah, sorry about that. The stadium is really nice.
I'm very interested in things like having notes, taking notes, because and my students have both excelled, and they're the ones that study for every class. I taught them that way, and that excelled that way. There's 2 dilemmas here about, number one is in Texas, there's no testing, there's test. And we know there's too many, but I know 0 is the wrong answer. Recently we had a legislator who wanted to get rid of all history tests. I thought that was a dumb piece of legislation, to be honest. But there's some happy medium. You can't answer that. But my real question is this. I want to focus on this having notes versus taking notes. And the question is when? Digital when? And it's something that I saw that I like to see you reproduce at Baylor somewhere else. And it was 3rd and 4th grade kids, type your name in the computer, and they had electrodes on there, a couple things lit out. Put a pencil in your hand and write your name out there, and boom, everything lit up. Type in 2 times 3 times 4 in a computer, a couple lights. Now put your pencil to 2 times 3 times 4. I'm talking about the transfer of knowledge. I'm talking the real learning that you begin with. That when do you? So my question is, Madam Chairman, is when does this? I would say the answer digital in kindergarten, elementary is wrong. There's got to be a foundation there. So I'm saying, when do we do that? We get that knowledge, that foundation you're talking about, that transfers to later years. When does it happen?
There is some evidence that shows, at least in older students, that taking notes by hand still has some benefits over taking notes on a computer, on an electronic device. It remains an open question. My sense is that the underlying operations are largely the same. It's only the mechanics that move. And whether you're moving your fingers to do a pencil this way or moving your fingers to type doesn't seem to matter as much. The problem, at least in older students, seems to be they're not just typing notes. They're typing notes while Facebook is open. They're typing notes while Twitter's open.
Yeah.
And it's a way of, we've got to find a way to remove those distractions. I could be wrong on that. There may be something involved in the actual mechanical operations, but we really have to remember that writing by hand is simply a technology. I would not be surprised if you could find writings from 125 years ago where people lamented the fact that students no longer knew how to take shorthand. My kids don't much write, and you can tell when they write me notes because their writing is really bad. There is some benefit to legible handwriting, but whether it's a major cognitive impairment, I'm skeptical, and the data certainly don't yet back that up. Whether that might be true in kindergartners remains an open question. I'll grant you that.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Ratliff.
Two quick questions. You mentioned the comment about learning style is just a kid's preference, and I would assume, and I'm going to say this as an assumption that's really posed as a question, I would assume that you would have a caveat for kids with learning disabilities, because a dyslexic child is going to do much better in a verbal exchange with a teacher versus a written exchange just from the, I mean, is that a fair assumption that there's a caveat to your comment?
That I would argue is not a learning style. That's it's a whole different thing.
That's not a preference. That's a okay.
And the learning disability question is a really interesting one. The best evidence now is that most folks, especially folks that have reading disabilities, don't do things qualitatively different than normal readers. The kinds of things that I grew up seeing, even the public service announcement, children mixing up letters, confusing left and right. That doesn't really seem to be the case with most readers. Most learning disabled dyslexic readers do exactly what normal readers do, just not nearly as well. What they do is what beginning readers do. And Sally Shaywitz at Yale has come up with the most effective techniques to treat dyslexic readers to benefit. And it's basically follow the same phonic-based instruction that we know works with all students. That ship has sailed. There is no doubt whatsoever that phonic-based instruction is the way to go for beginning readers. That's just beyond doubt at this point. The problem seems to be with dyslexic readers is they're bright enough that they figure out compensatory strategies so that they don't have to sound the words out, and that gets them only so far, but they still need drilling in the phonic-based instruction. So the learning disabilities thing, I would say yes. It's not a caveat with the learning styles. It wouldn't qualify.
It doesn't qualify as a style. I got you. And the other thing you said on the study guides, that the students ought to generate their own study guides and determine what's important. But isn't the role of the teacher at some level to say these are the important things? Because if I'm a kid learning about the Vietnam era, I'm going to focus on the music of it,
yes,
not what was going on politically. And at some level, the teacher has to be engaged in what's in the study guide.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what the students should do is review what it is the students thinks are important.
Okay.
And then say, you know, I saw Good Morning Vietnam too. I like the music too, but maybe this might be more important, you know?
Thank you, Dr. Weaver. Really appreciate it.